Hi, and welcome to VFX Tutors. I'm Josh, and in this tutorial we'll be continuing with our sword and our purge guy shot. And in this shot we will be just doing a single frame lineup in 3DEqualizer. We can do this in Maya, but the benefits of just doing this in 3D is a lot better, because then we can do our undistorted plates and all that and get our lineups really nice. So yeah, it's pretty much what we're going to do, is just do a single frame lineup. So I've got 3DEqualizer open here. So same as always, we can just go to our camera, select our live action footage. Oh, we're in the wrong one. Let's go to match move. So plate. And select our purge guy BG01 plate. As you say, it's coming really dark because we're in a linear color space. If we change, go to our 8-bit color conversion, change it to 2.2, we can see that we've got it in our sort of normal viewing color space. We can see it's quite a grainy shot because it's quite dark. Let's not worry about that because we can effectively degrain it in the end. So let's just go to our image controls windows. Let's just reset everything. If we turn it on, you can just turn a blur on it. It's not so hard on your eyes, but you can probably do a degrain on that later. But anyway, let's not worry about that. So we've pretty much got a single frame lineup. We're not animating any of our camera movements. So we just want to get a single frame lineup. And we've just built our very rough set geo. So we can bring it in and do a rough lineup and get it into sort of the correct sort of scene scale. So in our data folder, we have, as usual, our camera settings. We've got the purge guy, we've got Blackmagic 4K, we've got our sensor size, and we've got the lens that is used at 18mm. So as per usual, I'll always just put in the height. So I'm just going to go, and the only reason I do the height is because it's already set up. There's no reason for it apart from it's already, when you, as default, 3DEqualizer is already set. This is fixed and film back width is passive. You can do it with the width as fixed and height as passive. It just means that you have to change these, but if I just put in the height, I don't have to change anything. I can just do this, 88mm, and now that's instantly giving me the correct film back width and height. Like, you can do it with the width, but then it means you have to change these two, so it's up to you. It's clearly quicker just to do it that way. So yeah, all we're doing now is change our focal length to 18mm. Oh, not 189, just 18. And because we know it's an 18mm, we can go and bring in our lens grid. So go right click on cameras, add new, reference camera. Let's double click on that. And we're going to browse, and let's go to our lens grids, and we'll select the 18mm, and we can change this to 2.2 as well. Now we're going to press F3. So if you've done any of my other tutorials before, you've probably done this a million times, so you can just power through it. But if you haven't, it's really good to know how to do lens grids. But for every shot that I do, I try and get everything in as much as possible, even though I might be repeating myself. Someone might come across this tutorial and not know how to do this, so you can just fast forward if you don't want to. But this is pretty much as simple as that. I was just using Control left click to fill out the grid, and if you've gone too far, you can press Shift and Directions. So we just want to fill out this grid. I did that quite quick actually, so if you haven't done that, so I'm just gonna reset that quickly. So I just went through and did it so quick. So I usually select the top left hand point and click and drag it until you see the zebra line and snap it to the corner. And you only need to snap 3 corners, because if you've got a nice clear lens grid, you can select snap and it will snap the rest. Then all you have to do is hold Control, then press up, and hold Control and press down, and same with left, Control left, and Control right. Sorry, I just redid that just in case no one had seen that or knows how to do it, but I've got plenty of tutorials on it if you want to know more about it. And then I'm just going to calculate distortion geometry, select calc lens parameters. Now this is going to figure out all the lens parameters for this model. And it'll set parameters and close. And if you select the understort, you can see how much it's understorting. This is purely a visual thing, it doesn't do anything, it's just so you can see the distortion. So I'm going to go back to my sequence by double clicking on my camera. And if I select understort, you can see how much is it affecting the camera. And it's actually... And if I go to parts where that sword sort of comes off, you can see actually how much that changes it quite a lot. So it's really important that you do this sort of stuff with undistorted plates. Let's try and pick another part. And you can see how much that sort of grows there as well. And this will affect all your sort of tracking as well. So we're not actually tracking this because this is a single frame. So all we need to do is get a decent lineup. And we've got our rough set geo that we can import in. So I'm just going to go to my point group, right click, import OBJ file. And I'm just going to go to my set geo and bring in my room set geo. So press F5 and you'll probably see something like this. So I'm just going to center the models. If you hold shift and right click and just zoom out, you can sort of see our rough geometry. And it's really rough. We're not trying to make it perfect because it's just for a single frame lineup. So I'm mostly going to try and get this as close as I can with just using my holding shift and holding right click. So we've already got the focal length and we've got all the lens details. So all we have to do is get this lined up. So I'm just holding shift and then left click to rotate and just holding shift and right click and drag. I'm going to try and get this as close as I can without adding any points. So I'm just going to store the pose and then extract the vertex on the center. And then I'm going to extract a line up at the top here. And I hold. So I'm holding, when I select extract line, I'm holding control, then press left click. And you can see that's out of the area, so I can change that to valid always. And let's just select vertex on here and control left click, make another. So first of all, I'm just going to select my last one. Sort of roughly line these up. We may not get a perfect line up because it's only roughly done to the measurements, but we can get it fairly close. So all we're aiming to do here is get these sort of cylinders in the correct place, get these parallel lines working nicely. And if we change that to always, that means that's going to always be on. And we're not going to get, well, depends on how well you've modeled your geometry. I rushed it and it was very quick because we're not necessarily going to need it that much. Oh, and it's flipping around. So we may need just like an extra point down here. So I'm just trying to get as much as close as possible. So I can't guarantee that I'll put this in the right place. I only know the width, and it looks fairly consistently off to one side. So let's not worry too much about the green screen. We're going for majority fit here. Because we can, if you really wanted to, you can remodel this, but it's a single frame lineup and it doesn't particularly matter too much. But this helps us for that short amount of work that we did. It helps us a lot with. Sorry about that. My dog was barking at the door. Where were we? So yeah, we're just trying to get a pretty rough lineup, and like I said, it's only a single frame lineup. But the benefits of doing it like this now means that all we have to do is import it into Maya. We have our undistorted plates, we've got our lens information, it's all lined up, it's ready to go. We can do this in Maya, but then you still have to sort of undistort your plate, so it's more beneficial just to do this in 3DE if you can. So once you've got a lineup you're fairly happy with, yeah, these parallel lines are working for me. They're all seem to be in a reasonable place, and if it's not working, we can always adjust it later. So if we let's store our pose. So if we exported this out now, this would just import in back at the origin because we're only using lineup points. We need to go to F2, and we need to create a load of single frame points. Just doesn't matter where they are, and you don't need to track them, just press F5, select all of your points, and you can go edit, project points on 3D models, or press P if you've already made a shortcut. So project points, and they should all be surveyed. So now if you press Alt-C, it's now solved the position of that camera, and now that's all we need now. We just needed the single frame of that camera because we're going to be adding the object track, and in the CG that means it's going to be in the correct world space. And say if you're doing a 3D environment, that helps as well, but you could probably just do this with a matte painting. But yeah, we're pretty much done with this now. So we just go through and export all the things we need. So we've projected that out. We can delete these lineups, we don't really need them. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. So we're just going to go 3D, export project, and it's pretty self-explanatory for whatever ones that you want to export it as. I'm going to use Maya, but if you're using Houdini or FBX or anything like that, or 3ds Max or Blender, just export it exactly how it is. I'm using Maya, so I'm going to use Maya. I'm going to change my start frame to 1001, and go to export file, and let's make a new folder. I'll just call it tutorial, and I'll just call this purge guy guy PG01 cam V01. Select OK. So now I'm just going to go File, Export, Export LD3D4 Lens Distortion node. And this is what you'll use in your comp afterwards to undistort plates or redistort your CG or whatever you plan on doing. So I'm just going to call this the same again. Okay. So now that's exported that. So now our final thing that we need to do is export our undistorted plate. So we're going to need this for animating our sword. So you can do this in Nuke or Natron or whatever compositing software you're using. For the sake of this, I'm just going to do it in 3D and use Warp 4. So if you haven't used Warp 4 before, it's a very basic rendering software which comes with 3D, and it will just render out your undistorted plates. So I'm just going to click Destination Footage, Save Footage, and then Browse. I'm just going to go to my folder. I thought I made a folder in there called tutorial. I guess I didn't. I think I did, but I don't know why it's not showing. We'll just call this UDP. And I'm just going to call it purge guy BG01 UDP for undistorted plate. Select OK. So now all I'm going to do is just gonna, it will render out. We don't need overscan. What we can do is change it to 50% because we're going to be animating, and we can reduce the amount that we're working with. So we can just do a half res. So that will come in now at just a HD at 1920 by 1080, or you can leave it 100%. It's up to you. But I'm just going to scale it down by 50%. I'm not going to do an overscan because we don't really do those in the plates anymore. We do that in the rendering. So I'm just going to click render, and you should start seeing green keys come up shortly, and this will render out all our frames. So yeah, we're pretty much done with this section of it now. It was a fairly basic tutorial, quite quick. Shouldn't have been anything too complicated, but it's kind of the workflow that I go through when I'm doing stuff like this, and the sort of if you keep your workflows nice, clean, and sort of tidy, and not try and take any shortcuts, it will work out a lot better for you in the long run. So this might take a while, so I might fast forward through this. Cool, so that's now rendered. We can close this. File, exit. And now we're pretty much done. Our next step is just to import this into Maya. In fact, actually, no, we have one more thing. Let's actually check this by importing our sword, because we can get our actual initial single frame. Sorry, I completely forgot about that part. So I'm just going to go through my timeline, and I'm going to pick a frame where I see the most of the sword. Well, it's actually quite tricky because I don't see much of the sword. It's always... So I think maybe this frame we see a lot. So we've exported everything out, and we forgot one bit. So I'm actually going to import in the sword as, say if you're doing an object, let's just turn this off. See. So I'm going to import this in as if we're doing an object track. So we can actually get our first frame lineup really nice, but also to check if everything's working well. Because if the sword doesn't line up in this, something's gone wrong. So I'm going to right click on my point group, and I'm going to add new point group. Now it should automatically come in as object. So now if I double click on that, I'm just going to go to my 3D models, I'm going to right click, import 3D model. So if you haven't already made this, this might be a little bit tricky, or you can download it from my Patreon page. You can still build the sword from my previous tutorials, but if you're just doing this, you can download it from my Patreon. So sword, and I've got the sword scan and sword prop. I'm just going to bring in the prop. If I press F5, got a rough lineup, and we can hide this. Geo. So now I'm just going to select extract vertex. I'm going to pick the tip of the sword. I'm just going to hold shift and sort of rotate it around. It can be quite difficult to work with once you've got one point in an object, so you want to get quite a few down, because it can sort of go a little bit crazy sometimes. So I'm just holding shift to sort of roughly get this in place. And already looking at it, it's looking, well, it's not amazing, but it's looking pretty close. But hopefully with some sort of some fine tuning, we can get our first frame line up really nice. So I'm just going to try and get this as close as possible. So it's always difficult when you're working with tracking props, because the likelihood of them sort of bending and twisting as you sort of move around is quite high. We've got quite a lot of this fitting, and we're only going to be, say for like this shot, we're only going to be improving, updating the blade. We're not going to be doing anything to the handle, because that could just be too much work for this. So what we'd probably do is just replace the blade and make it look a little bit more like a sword, because it looks very proppy at the moment. So our main focus with the object tracked is to get this sort of the handle and the blade locked down really tight. But it's hard to tell if things have been bent or slightly wonky. It could even be possibly the lens. And the quickest way to check if it's the lens is just to slide our focal length and see at any point, does it improve or just get worse? I think it's just got worse. So I think this is more down to, this is quite flimsy. It's probably a little bit wobbly. So I'm going to put this back to what we had originally. And I expect probably a lot of people have missed this part of the tutorial, because I kind of almost went too soon to the export, so everyone probably thinks I'm finished. But yeah, there's still a little bit more, just to check if it's right. So I feel that's pretty good. So I'm just going to go do the same again. I'm just going to make some single frames. I'm going to hold Control, left click, and make some single frame points. Five. I'm just going to select all those. Edit, project points for 3D models. Press Alt-C and solve. So I'm just going to delete my lineup points. So I do kind of want this to fit. So that should be like that. So let's just unsurvey those. And let's line up. Let's just use the extract vertex on this end of the sword. And this is usually the best way to check if you're working with something that wobbles. Let's just focus on a small area first and try and get that lined up. And you can sort of see that everything's working here. And it's likely that the sword is just wobbling, and it's quite unfortunate that it is. I thought it's quite... Yeah, even when we change the focal length, you can sort of see it's just changing along that sort of... Even if we did the distortion, see there's no change. So I think I've just broke the distortion. Whoops. So we've pretty much figured out now that even changing this, it's not changing the fact that this is still like slightly out. So let's go back to this. Just fix this again. And put our lens back. And it's just good to check. we haven't really achieved anything apart from a single frame lineup here, but it helps now that we know the sword is wobbling. Exactly. So we might be able to tackle this by making, when we get to sort of doing this sword animation, we might end up doing a very small rig, possibly, or maybe a slight blend shape to fix with the sort of wobbling. Nothing massive, just a small amount. But yeah, we want to try and get this nice. So anyway, it doesn't matter too much because we want our blade to work. And everything else is working really nice. So I've been chattering quite a lot. So we've now done our single frame. So if we press F6, and you know what, let's unhide our room set geo. And we can just have a look and see if this looks crazy or not. I don't know, I think that looks fairly reasonable. Like, it looks about the right distance that I stood in front of the green screen. So I stood about here. It's quite a tight space to be doing any filming. It's not ideal, but I couldn't really film outside, so I tried to get something for you guys. Even if it is probably shot on the worst green screen ever, but maybe we can try some roto skills with that. Anyway, so let's select our sword prop, and let's remember we're on a frame 104, because this is what we're probably going to use our start frame on for our animation. So let's go 3D models, export 3D model as OBJ, browse, and I'm just going to go back to match move. Oh, the tutorial thing's in there, whoops. So we'll just call sword LUP, and LUP's for lineup, or we can just call it S for single. SF LUP for single frame lineup. Sorry about that. And we'll just click export. Now this is going to export the sword at the exact position at frame 104, which would be 1104. So we've actually already exported everything else, so we are actually now finished. So yeah, we've done our single frame lineup of our room, we've undistorted our plate, we've got our lens, we've exported our camera, and we've got our sword single frame lineup. So our next step is to go into Maya and possibly, well, we'd line up our sword geo. Just trying to think if it's worth putting a... We'll put a small blend shape on the sword for any wobble if we need to. But yeah, we're done with the single frame lineups. So if you've enjoyed this tutorial, hit that like button and subscribe for more.